Oh, Benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 137 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is perseverance, and I am Dr. Thibault. So we are looking at the parts of fortitude, which is one of the cardinal virtues. So we are in the last of the subjective or the potential parts of fortitude. These are the virtues which strengthen fortitude, which gives it strength, its potency, the potential part. So we have perseverance here, and then next will be the vices opposed to it. So perseverance in the first article is a virtue. That's the question: is perseverance a virtue? And St. Thomas uses the same definitions over and over again. So um, if there's difficulty if there's difficulty and there's the good, then there's virtue. So whenever there's a difficulty that needs to be overcome by the good, you got a virtue. So perseverance uh, kind of fits within that category. St. Thomas goes on to define what a special virtue is, which, if you might have noticed, he really hasn't defined very. I don't think he's really defined it up until this point. We're in the third cardinal virtue right at the end. But a special virtue, he says, um, is when there's a special kind of difficulty or goodness, there is a special virtue. So, how about perseverance? How does this apply? So, uh, somebody who's has perseverance is somebody who um, deals with the difficult and the good in two ways. But one in itself. Um, so you are overcoming that challenge, that difficulty through perseverance. Right? That you have this challenge ahead of you, and you keep going. Therefore, in itself, it is a goodness which overcomes difficulty. So by definition, it's a virtue. And then also from length of time. So a virtue, very seldom a virtue if it's very brief, right? Chastity for a moment isn't really chastity. It has to be habitual, right? It has to become part of one's character for it to actually be a virtue. Uh, so length of time counts. Perseverance is all about length of time. Perseverance is about doing the good, avoiding the evil, over a long period of time. That's kind of the nature of perseverance. Uh, and therefore, kind of by definition, perseverance is not only a virtue, but a special virtue because it's dealing with special kinds of difficulty and goodness, not just in a moment, but over a long period of time. That makes it special. Now, is perseverance part of fortitude? Again, St. Thomas kind of goes right back to the definition of things. So, fortitude is a principal virtue because it observes firmness in matter, wherein it is most difficult to stand firm, namely the danger of death. So that's what fortitude is. So does perseverance have anything to do with that? Um, he says, any virtue which is praised for its firm endurance of something difficult must be part of fortitude. So perseverance is definitely part of that since it's about firm endurance. Right? That's the heart of perseverance, is that it endures uh, over something difficult and it stays resolved in its efforts. So it's very much aligned with fortitude. Now, perseverance moderates certain passions. Uh, Primarily, St. Thomas says in response to objection 2, fear of weariness or failure on account of delay. Um, in that regard, it's like the irascible appetite. So we just covered patience last question, 136. Patience was a concupiscible um, matter because it was dealing with uh, sorrow. So sorrow is an emotion. So because it's dealing with the emotions, patience was dealing with emotions. It was concupiscible. But this we're dealing with um, weariness and fear. Well, when we're dealing with fear, this isn't something we're drawn to. It's something we're run away from, right? We flee from. So if it's something we flee from naturally, it would be irascible. So perseverance is like fortitude in that it is dealing with the irascible appetites, something kind of negative. So you're going through the negative and you keep going, right? You endure with firmness. Therefore, it's more like fortitude than even patience was. Now, constancy, how does constancy relate to perseverance? Are they related? And St. Thomas says, yes, perseverance and constancy both deal with uh, firmly persisting in some good. So somebody who's dealing with constancy is moving in the good, perseverance moving firmly to some good, but they are different too. So they differ in that those things which make it difficult to persist in the good. So here's how they differ. Um, Constancy deals with external matters. So if a person is enduring hardships along the way, maybe picture people going out to the gold rush in California, for example. You're dealing with snakes and droughts and grasshoppers and all of these things. If you continue all the way, you make it all the way to California, that's a matter of constancy because you overcome the obstacles, those external hindrances on your way to California, as a just as an example. Whereas perseverance deals with internal things. So if in the back of your mind you go, why are we even going there? I don't even really want to go to California. It was better back in New England, right? This is the issues of the Israelites leaving Egypt and going through the desert, right? The flesh pots of Egypt was better than this manna in the desert. It's better than starving in the desert. This is dealing with not necessarily external things. They had everything they needed, but internal motivation. So perseverance deals with the internal versus constancy, which deals with the external. Interesting distinction between the two. So does perseverance need the help of grace? Well, yes, of course, but in two different ways. So one is the regular type of grace needed for all of the virtues, which we call habitual grace. Um, One has to have this grace of practicing perseverance. So we practice perseverance, which is in itself a grace. Uh, but it requires an act of the will. It takes an act of the will to keep doing it. If we just say, I'm done with this, right, then habitual grace isn't going to work. Habitual grace gets us started and moves us along the way, but you're not going to get the virtue of perseverance if you're working against it. Right? If your will is opposed to perseverance, it's not going to work. So you have to go along with habitual grace. Uh, the act would kind of work with God in that. But then there's also this like somewhat supernatural grace that's also part of perseverance, and that's dealing with persevering in the faith, enduring until death. So that that one could persevere all the way to death, persevere all the way to martyrdom is a supernatural grace. Uh, Now, the supernatural grace natural, builds on nature, right? So it builds on habitual grace. Right? If a person has never had this virtue before, maybe it'd be hard. An example of this was a story of these monks and Russian monks, and they lived very well off the land. There's a lot of small monasteries in Russia, and the monks can be large land owners and live pretty well. And they feasted and got fat, and their clothes were covered in bacon grease, and they weren't particularly a penitential group. And then when uh, when there was new leadership, when communism came on Russia, and they said a group came out to the monastery and they took all the icons out and they took the holy relics out and they threw them in the ground. And the communists told the monks, it's time to step on the icons, right? They gathered the whole town there, um, so they could see the monks just hypocrites, right? They're not, they don't, they want the people to lose the faith and trust the Communist Party. And the monks are all out there, and this is their only way to save their lives is to stomp on the icons and relics and holy objects. And the abbot looks to his brothers and said, "We lived as pigs. Let us let us die, at least as Christians." Um, this is really an example of that supernatural grace. They had acquired no habitual grace of perseverance in the faith, um, but in their last act uh, was supernatural by supernatural grace that gave them that strength to be a martyr. And then obviously the communists killed them because they were unwilling to walk on the relics and the icons. So in conclusion, perseverance is a virtue, because it overcomes difficulty and it pursues the good. It is part of fortitude. Fortitude deals with difficult things, enduring difficult things even to the danger of death. Perseverance is part of that, right? It's part of that overcoming difficult things to the point of death. Perseverance relates to constancy. Constancy deals with more external things, perseverance more internal, but both of them are about endurance. And perseverance, enduring unto death, requires a special supernatural grace, but normally requires habitual grace. So next we will move on to the vices associated with perseverance.